Wow, might actually get 3 videos done in one day, and I need to close the door. Of course, 2 of those videos were only about 25 minutes combined, so not that huge of accomplishment, and I haven't actually done this one yet. This could very well go horribly, but still, small victories. Anyway, my name is Jeremy Sims. I enjoy teaching the Bible, and I really like delving deep into the Word, as deep as I can, and just sharing what I find with other people. This is my long-form video. We've been doing Jeremiah here recently, and this will be the first section on Jeremiah 6. I think we're doing about 8 verses there. And what I like doing is I just like trying to go verse by verse, word by word, just break it down as much as I can and pull out anything interesting. Word by word might be overselling a little bit. I don't actually do every word and like, what does this mean? Here's the Strongs. That would be really boring even by my standards. But I do like just, reading commentaries, comparing perspectives, and thinking about myself and seeing what we come up with. Hopefully you'll find it fun. So, what do we have going on in this section? I don't know, because I wasn't planning on teaching it until I realized I had some more time 5 seconds ago. So, let me look it over again. I mean, I know the section. I have like tons of notes and looked over this earlier today. I just didn't think I was about to do it, So, gotta get my head in Jeremiah 6 space now. All right, I remember now what this section's about. So, little tease, this section is actually kind of interesting. For most of the stuff, when I first read it, I'm kind of like, okay, I have a pretty good idea what this is talking about, but there's a lot. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of nuance here and connections, and those will come with me as I study it more. This section was actually a little different in that there were several things here I'm like, I don't really know why that's there at all. So I'm hoping maybe this will be something that will be a little mysterious to you. We have stuff like, why are these cities mentioned in particular? Why is Benjamin talked about? What is this? What's this idea of camping around somebody? Why are these 2 people talking about invading, and maybe we won't invade, and yes, maybe we will invade? Siege mounds are kind of interesting if you don't know about them. And then also this whole thing about, there's a verse that's kind of hard to translate and is a little bit of a weird word picture. Jeremiah likes to talk about word pictures quite a lot. That's about a well or a fountain or something like that. So yeah, I just find that this one is takes a little bit more looking into to kind of unpack it. Even though Jeremiah is usually kind of tough, this one's it's not incredibly hard because some of these you really have to think about, but this one's not quite as transparent as some of the others. So before we get to this section, let's kind of ramp up to it by covering what we covered last video, and that is the end of Jeremiah chapter 5. We see in that section that God says, you're a foolish and senseless people that have eyes and see not, have ears, hear not. Says, you don't even fear me. He talks about the ocean, and basically it's kind of funny little metaphor. He says that though the ocean stays where I put it, and it tries to fight me, but it can't get away, you guys are stubborn and rebellious, and you don't stay where I put you at all. They don't have any fear of God. It talks about how, like, you're not getting blessings even as basic as the rain because you weren't thankful for them. I had to turn these things away. You've kept good things from you by clinging to your sin. He talks about, and this is kind of a weird section where he talked about wicked men as fowlers, as in people who hunt fowls, and that's a complicated metaphor. If you want more information on it, look at the last video in the long Jeremiah playlist. I say long as in I have a short version. That's something else to say. If you don't want all the nitty-gritty details, I have a short version video of this. It's about 15 minutes long for a half a chapter, and then I have some that are like more like an hour and a half for half a chapter. So take your pick on that. But I have a long video playlist, short video playlist. Find what you want. So if you want the nitty-gritty breakdown on what the bird-fowler metaphor means, go there. But long story short, I think what's talking about is the sort of, like a fowler would find a bunch of birds, hunt them, set traps for them, and then keep them all in a cage, fatten them up, and eat off of them as a predator. So these people were doing a similar thing with people. Now, not similar probably in literal hunting of people and not like slave trade probably, though that's an argument some people have made for the passage, but it's not a very popular one. Personally, I think what's talking about is probably people who are perverting justice, because that's what it starts talking about in the next few verses, where it talks about how you're forsaking justice, that you're perverting justice, that you're forsaking the rights of the poor and the needy. And I think what it's talking about is basically being bribed to throw the court system in favor of those that had the money for the bribes. And God's saying, I'm going to get my vengeance on you guys. I'm not going to let you get away with this. And he talks about how it's horrible, not only that that especially the religious class, are following after these wicked ways, but that God's people actually like it this way. Not only like it, they love it this way. So that's what we covered in the last section. For this section, we're just going to hit, I think, 8 verses. Yeah, first 8 verses, 1 through 8. Let's read the entire thing, and then we'll break it down verse by verse, and we'll see what we can see. Flee for safety, O people of Benjamin, from the midst of Jerusalem. Blow the trumpet in Tekoa, and raise a signal on Beth-haccherem. For disaster looms out of the north, and great destruction. The lovely and delicately bred I will destroy, the daughter of Zion. Shepherds with their flocks shall come against her. They shall pitch their tents round her. They shall pasture, each in its place. Prepare war against her. Arise, and let us attack at noon. Woe to us, for the day declines, for the shadows of evening lengthen. Arise, and let us attack by night, and destroy her palaces. For thus says the Lord of hosts, cut down her trees, cast up a siege mound against Jerusalem. This is the city that must be punished. There is nothing but oppression within her. As a well keeps its water fresh, so she keeps fresh her evil. Violence and destruction are heard within her. Sickness and wounds are ever before me. Be warned, O Jerusalem, lest I turn from you in disgust, lest I make you a desolation, an uninhabited land. All right, so again, a little confusing perhaps. Let's break it down verse by verse. Flee for safety, O people of Benjamin, from the midst of Jerusalem. So, people of Benjamin, so far things have been directed either towards Judah or Jerusalem or something, or Judah or Jerusalem or Israel or something very similar to that. This is the first time, as best as I can recall, that Benjamin was referenced. So that's kind of weird. Why Benjamin? Well, this is weird, but apparently Jerusalem. All right, so we know that the land of Israel was originally 12 tribes, even that's a little more complicated than that. But let's just say there were different tribes of Israel, right? And then there was the civil war, and the two nations went their own separate ways, Israel being the northern kingdom, Judah being the southern kingdom. Well, we're now dealing with just the southern kingdom of Judah. And in those kingdoms, the primary kingdoms to go that way were Judah and Benjamin. There were, I'm sure, some other Israelites that probably came to Judah in that section, from other tribes, but the lands that actually departed from northern territory Israel were Benjamin and Judah. So something I never realized before is that Jerusalem is apparently right on the border between Benjamin and Judah, as best as I can tell, which is strange. And Judah is on the southern part, Benjamin is on the northern part of Jerusalem. The dividing line is actually there. So this is from thirdmill.com. I'm going to try to do a better job mentioning my sources. It's almost always just purely from online stuff. Thirdmill.com has a quote from John Lightfoot, who wrote some temple service in the Prospect of Time book. Anyway, he states that according to Jewish tradition, the altars and sanctuary were in Benjamin, and the courts of the temple were in Judah. So again, literally, if this is correct, the temple is right straight on the dividing line between Benjamin and Judah, which this probably is correct because apparently, I don't know if it's correct, but what I was finding was that some people would say that Jerusalem was in Judah, and some would say it was in Benjamin, so it's kind of confusing. It's for sure real close, and it seems like, according to this, it was actually straight up divided on that mountain. So, so why is Benjamin mentioned? Babylon is coming from the north. Babylon is actually over to the east in relation to Judah, but there's a big desert in between Babylon and Judah, so they have to go around from the north. So they're coming from the north to the south. So they're going to be going straight through Benjamin to get to Judah. So the idea is, you're in the way of the opposing army, get out of there. Now this is probably a particularly personal thing to Jeremiah, because he was a Benjamite, he was from the land of Benjamin. I suppose it's possible that God might be referring to the entire land of Judah as Benjamin, but If so, perhaps it's suggesting the vulnerability of Judah, because Benjamin was the youngest brother. If you'll cast your mind back to the story of Joseph and his brothers, Benjamin was the youngest one that they were all trying to protect at the end because, well, that's the whole thing. You either know the story or not. It's not worth going play by play. But he's the most vulnerable brother, the youngest brother. So it could be kind of summing up that imagery by referring to the land as Benjamin instead of Judah this time. Or it could be just saying, hey, tribe of Benjamin, get out of the way. Let Judah take it on the chin. You guys save yourself. Now that's another thing. This is a little bit weird. Flee for safety, O people of Benjamin, from the midst of Jerusalem. Now the reason I say this is weird is because in an earlier section, the advice seemed to be just the opposite. From Jeremiah 4, verse 5, declare in Judah and proclaim in Jerusalem, and say, blow the trumpet through the land, cry aloud and say, assemble and let us go into the fortified city. Raise a standard towards Zion, flee for safety, stay not, for I bring disaster from the north and great destruction. So here, God tells Judah, which I presume means the entire land of Judah, since that's generally how it was described. But it says to Judah and proclaim in Jerusalem and say, hey, run into your cities. If you're not in a city, blow the trumpet and tell people, head for Mount Zion, which is, in Jerusalem. Head towards Zion. Flee for safety, stay not. So, whereas one seems to be like, hole up in Jerusalem, or the other one seems to be like, run away from Jerusalem. So it seemed to be opposite types of advice. Now, something I didn't actually consider until I was saying this is that maybe Judah here is specifically referring to the tribe of Judah rather than the nation of Judah, in which case it might make sense that, it might make sense maybe for some reason God was wanting Judah to have the harsher judgment, whereas Benjamin it wanted to pass by on judgment. It might also be that God isn't really trying to instruct them as in, this is what I want you to do. It might just be this might be simply me overthinking everything. The message might just be like, run, trouble's coming, get out, watch out, whatever you're going to do, because it's coming. So it might just be a general run sort of message. This could also just be describing what the people will do, kind of prophetically looking forward and saying that, some people are going to run into the cities, like that's what they're going to do when they see the trouble coming, or some people are going to scatter. It might not be advice at all. It might just be like, this is what you're going to do, kind of looking towards things in the future. I kind of am interested in the idea that there's two separate instructions for Benjamin and Judah. That would be interesting, though I'm not sure that's the case. Regardless, here Benjamin is told, run for it, trouble's coming. Flee for safety, O people of Benjamin, from the midst of Jerusalem. I can't talk. Blow the trumpet in Tekoa, I'm probably mispronouncing these words just for the record, and raise a signal on Beth-haccherem, for disaster looms out of the north and great destruction. So, nothing much for the disaster looms from the north and great destruction, but why these two cities in particular? Blow the trumpet in Tekoa and raise a signal on Beth-haccherem. If God chose to use these words in particular, they probably must have been chosen for some reason. Like, why these cities? Well, they're believed to both have been close to Jerusalem for one thing, so that would make sense. Kind of get out, trouble's coming your direction. They also have specific other reasons I think they were chosen. So Beth-haccherem was a city in Judah whose name meant something like house of the vineyard. Beth, anytime you see that, it means house. And let's see, so it says, so it's interesting just that right there of the vineyard coming up, it being a house of a vineyard, because vineyards are one of Jeremiah's favorite metaphors. He's already mentioned these twice in Jeremiah 2:21. Yet I planted you a choice vine, wholly of pure seed. How have you then become degenerate and become a wild vine? Jeremiah 5:10. Go up through her vine rows and destroy, but make not a full end. Strip away your branches, for they are not the Lord's. So, this, just like preachers these days will have their favorite little pet metaphors, Jeremiah had his, and he went to this vineyard metaphor quite often. So that the fact that he talks about a vineyard becoming corrupt and getting destroyed or cleared out, or at least pruned back significantly, that it doesn't belong to the Lord anymore, that choosing a city with the name vineyard, I don't think there's any chance that's a coincidence. It also says, what does it say about Beth-haccherem? It says, raise a signal. Well, what kind of signal? Well, it's believed probably meaning a smoke signal. Signal fire was, this is from Harrison. The signal fire was specifically mentioned in the Lachish letters, which documented the eventual Babylonian invasion. The use of such signals was an ancient Mesopotamian method of military communication. So this is either the Israelis warning one another with saying, some sort of smoke signal probably, saying, hey, it's on the way. Or maybe it was just the fire itself was visible. I guess at night you'd just be looking at the fire itself. Or maybe it's the Babylonians conquering those cities and signaling to others. I would think it would probably be a defensive thing, though, because you probably want to set up your cities so that one could see the other signal areas. Would make sense to me as sort of an early warning system. So I think it's also interesting that, if you're destroying vineyards, if you're cutting them back, if you're taking them apart, we know when Jesus does his metaphor of the unfruitful vineyards, the branches that are pruned back, well, what happens to those? Those branches are burned. So I think the idea might be connected as well. What do you do with a vineyard that's not doing good for you? You get rid of it and it's burned up the brush, right? You got to do something useful with it. Want those nutrients to go back into the ground, right? So what about the other one, the blow the trumpet in Tekoa? Well, I don't have anything quite as deep there, but quite frankly, trumpet and Tekoa sound similar in Hebrew as well as English. They're very similar words, apparently. This is from Explaining the Book. Tekoa was also a city in Judah, and the significance of God naming that city here is perhaps because the name Tekoa sounds like the Hebrew word translated as blow, takong. So yeah, it's like Tekoa, takong, just doing like a little wordplay. In this city, Tekoa, they were to blow takang, the trumpet, which is a reference to signaling everybody that they should retreat from the enemy. Yeah, obviously it's a get out of here sort of thing. So I'm probably slaughtering the pronunciation there. I think I actually did listen to this in Hebrew, and they did sound really similar when in Hebrew. So just a funny little wordplay, it would seem. So as long as we're here, any sort of principles to extract out of here? Well, I think one thing is maybe to consider is if you see great destruction coming your way, maybe you should get out of there. It's kind of silly, but it might be something to actually think about, because sometimes we do spiritually or just practically see problems coming, and yeah, taking heed might be something to consider. Taking heed and getting out of there. No reason for you to go down with the sinking ship most of the time. Verse 2, the lovely and delicately bred I will destroy, the daughter of Zion. So again, this is a weird phrase, but Zion is associated with Jerusalem, which is of course associated with Judah, and the daughter of Zion isn't really talking about, from what I've read in commentaries and stuff, isn't really talking about the daughter of Judah or Zion. It's actually talking about Judah as a daughter of God. So what you see here is a really sad thing. I've got two little girls, and it breaks my heart to think about it every time. But it says, the lovely and delicately bred I will destroy. So in other words, you're beautiful, you're so, accultured and brought up well, theoretically. He says, I will destroy. You're my own daughter, and I'm going to destroy you, is what he's saying. You're delicate and beautiful, but destruction is coming. Think of how huge a burden that would be to be the almighty judge of the universe and to feel fatherly towards a people. That's I don't know. It's weird to think, like, if your child committed a horrible crime and you had to be a judge over it, how would that make you feel? And you knew they deserved the death penalty or something like that. What sort of conflict would that feel? Would you feel in that situation? Also, there's an invader coming. Another perspective on this, and I don't think these are mutually exclusive, just different ways of considering this particular word picture or metaphor that Jeremiah comes up with here. The lovely and delicately bred I will destroy, the daughter of Zion. So invaders are coming, and Judah, which was once a powerful military force, or at least people that had some manly men that were able to take care of their own land. Think of like David and his mighty men. Were able to take care of business. They were the ones who took the land from supposedly much greater forces back in the day. Well, now they're not being characterized that way. They're being characterized as lovely and delicately bred. So they're more like a defenseless young maiden while an invading army is on the way rather than warriors. They've lost their strength and manliness and ability to defend themselves. So that might also be part of the image that's being summoned up here. Shepherds with their flocks will come against her. They shall pitch their tents around her. They shall pasture, each in his place. Now, there was a metaphor in one of the previous chapters about somewhat similar to this with shepherds or keeper of the fields, which could be referring to like garden fields surrounding Jerusalem. And I think it's somewhat similar idea here. But it might be summing up ideas of the siege warfare that would eventually fell Jerusalem. But I think there's some other stuff going on here too. It's weird, right? Shepherds, we don't think of that being particularly scary, like, ooh, shepherds, yeah, you're going to camp around us, scary. But shepherds with their flocks shall come against her. Now, we know it's not a friendly metaphor. It's not a chill thing because it's against her. It throws in that term. So we know something more than actual shepherds, obviously. So shepherds are metaphorically they're leaders. They're people who take flocks other places, right? So I think it's probably talking about, like the military commanders as shepherds over their soldiers, and they shall pitch tents around her. You got the siege army, and they shall pasture, each in his place. So I think maybe there's an idea here of, the lovely and delicately bred, I will destroy the daughter of Zion. We were focusing on that a second ago more as the daughter type aspect of it, but also it's a beautiful land, a delicate land, a wonderful land. And whereas Judah had been able to profit from it, now Babylon wanted to take it for themselves, and they wanted to pasture in it. They were wanting to take the resources for themselves. So they're pasturing in it. They're going to use it as a place to graze, right? They're going to build up their own people by using this area. Verse 4, prepare war against her. And this is one of the first sections that really made me go, what's going on here? Prepare war against her. Arise and let us attack at noon. Woe to us, for the day declines, for the shadows of evening lengthen. Arise and let us attack by night and destroy her palaces. So yeah, this entire section seems strange to me, or it seems strange to me. I think I know what it's talking about now, but it took me a while in reading a few different things before I put it together. And I can't find the right window. Hold on. All right, so I think what we have here is we just got finished talking about the shepherds with their flocks will come against her, but we know this is referring to, metaphorically, a military, an invading force, right? So here we have one person, maybe two people going back and forth, but at least one person talking to somebody else and talking about their plans for what to do to Judah. Prepare war against her. Arise and let's attack at noon. So, they're very excited about it. Let's go. Oh, woe to us, for the day declines, for the shadows of evening lengthen. Oh, crud, it's getting too late in the day. Apparently, back in the ancient day, they were pretty polite about attacking during the daytime. At least that's the impression I get. Which, we didn't have lights back in the day, so that makes it kind of hard, I would say. I guess you had fire and stuff. I don't know. Don't know enough about ancient warfare. But it seems to be the idea of like, oh, well, we usually don't attack at night, and, day's almost spent. Maybe we should just pack it in. You can almost see this as being like a back and forth sort of thing. Like, let's go. Oh, it's getting too late. Crud. Really want to go. Then what's the next thing? Arise and let us attack by night and destroy her palaces. So the idea here is just the eagerness of the enemy to destroy. They're ready to go. They are just chomping at the bits, right? So it's just another way of talking about how quickly judgment is going to be coming on Judah. But regardless, I think if you read it in that context of with this in your mind, I think it makes more sense. Just with the idea of they're just chomping at the bit to go in. Shepherds with their flocks will come against her, metaphorically a military force. They shall pitch their tents around her. Of course, soldiers are going to be in tents. They shall pasture each in his place. Prepare war against her. Arise and let us attack at noon. Woe to us, for the day declines, for the shadows of evening lengthen. Arise and let us attack by night and destroy her palaces. Which, of course, palaces, these would be the place with great riches where the powerful resides. Oh, yeah, even Even the best places are going to be destroyed. Moving on, verse 6. For thus says the Lord of hosts, cut down her trees, cast up a siege mound against Jerusalem. This is the city that must be punished. There is nothing but oppression within her. As a well keeps its water fresh, so she keeps fresh her evil. Violence and destruction are heard within her. Sickness and wounds are ever before me. Be warned, O Jerusalem, lest I turn from you in disgust, lest I make you a desolation, an uninhabited land. So, verse 6, for thus the Lord says the Lord of hosts, again, Lord of hosts being the title of, I say again, this was a previous video, but Lord of hosts being like host of the military, right? So this is like God saying, these people are coming for you, but they're kind of doing it in my name. Be afraid of me is the idea there. Because, of course, these nations that were used for judgment against Jerusalem and Judah were ultimately destroyed by God, too, because they were wicked themselves. So it's not like they are the powerful ones in the end, not the ones with the ultimate power. God is. Cut down her trees, cast up a siege mound against Jerusalem. So siege mounds are interesting. The first time I saw... do you know what a siege tower is? You think about ancient warfare... before they had, planes and stuff to drop the bombs and wherever you wanted to. They'd have, walled cities were kind of huge, at least before you had something to knock them down. I guess even before planes were invented, you had artillery strong enough that it was significantly less beneficial to have walls around cities. But back in the day, that was huge to have walls around cities. So what a siege mound was, and I've seen this in movies and TV shows, and maybe you have as well. The first time I saw it, I thought it was some sci-fi kind of adventure or some nonsense Hollywood thing, but apparently these actually existed. So a siege tower would be something that would be a multi-tiered, I don't know, like a mini skyscraper, like picture like a 3-story tall thing on wheels that they just roll up to the city, and then they'd put their people up, would have ramps on it, and the people would just start on the ground level and work their way up and then go over the top and be in the city, which is kind of crazy. So that's a siege tower. Well, but, because people knew, they didn't want that to happen, obviously, to their cities, they'd often build them in places where it wouldn't have been easy to get the siege tower up against the walls. They'd do, rough places or inclines. So a siege mound, as I understand it, is an attempt to build up a ramp for a siege tower to come up against the city. So you want to level out the ground. You want to get something that you can actually push your siege towers into position for. I think another type of siege mound might be when you just try to get something that you directly put up against the wall to climb over the city sides. So without the tower, you just build a ramp, basically. More direct ramp. Anyway, so reading this, sorry, it's getting late and I can tell my brain's starting to fail. For thus says the Lord, my brain's just like goes slower and slower and creakier and creakier, and I find it harder and harder to say words. For thus says the Lord of hosts, cut down her trees, cast up a siege mound against Jerusalem. So think about this, they're cutting down Jerusalem's trees and then doing a siege mound. So they're taking Jerusalem's own resources in order to destroy her. This is a city that must be punished. There's nothing but oppression within her. Now, I've got to talk about this. I kind of hate to, and I kind of am very eager to. I need to do an entire video on this subject, but critical race theory is something that's been talked about a lot in church circles here recently. And I don't have time to unpack it, which is why I kind of hate to get into it. But it's very much based on the idea of oppression. White people are oppressive, black people are oppressed. So something I've mentioned briefly in my other videos and haven't had time to unpack. So I'm going to unpack a little bit here in case just to be a little bit more clear. I criticize not just critical race theory, which is, of course, anti-Christian, but also social justice writ large, because social justice is not a Christian term. Justice is a Christian term. Social justice is a left-wing political concept. Now, I guess there's probably might be some left-wing people read this or watch this. That's fine. I'm not getting into that any further than it is to just talk about social justice and biblical justice and how those two things relate. So social justice is not in the Bible. Justice is. The social justice concept, people want to criticize critical race theory, but they often take large aspects of it embedded in social justice. And social justice is, and this is not a perfect description, but it's essentially the idea that, my simplified description for sake of being relatively brief, is that social justice looks at different social groups and says this group has more or less of whatever, usually money on the most basic level, and therefore the group that's doing better is oppressive and the group that's doing worse is oppressed. And then it kind of just backfills the excuses for why this is. They come up with the reasons later. But basically, it's just looking at the discrepancies and saying is fundamentally oppressive that people do not have the same amount of stuff. So why am I talking about all this? Because I keep seeing Christians, I'm trying very hard to be kind here, Christians who are adopting large elements of social justice thought, and that is not biblical thought. The Bible never says that discrepancy in resources between people is a bad thing. It definitely talks about charity, absolutely. It never says everybody is necessarily supposed to have the same amount of stuff. It doesn't say that's oppression. Oppression is when you are harming another person in terms of like taking away their freedom or life or property. That's oppression. We've heard lots of descriptions throughout the first 5 books of the old of Jeremiah about the types of oppression they engaged in. Just in last week's lesson, they were perverting justice, and they're doing in relation to the poor and the fatherless. And it's not that they just didn't give them stuff. That's nowhere in that text. It is that they were perverting justice. They were not doing correct judgment in relation to those people. So look, if this seems controversial to you, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does seem controversial to you, what you need to do is look up what oppression means, look up what justice means, look how the Bible uses these terms. Because you cannot just see, what I see people do is, I see the social justice movement has changed the definition of justice and oppression to, if you actually look at it closely, they're just saying justice is when people have the same amounts of stuff, oppression is when people have different amounts of stuff. I know that sounds stupid, but that is what they're saying. If you really look into them and listen to them and get past all the blah, blah, blah stuff and get down to the nitty-gritty, that is the essence of the philosophy with a bunch of nonsense stuffed on top of it. So listen to them, and then look at the Bible, and make sure you understand how the Bible is defining its own terms, because if you allow them to change the definition of meanings and then read that into the text, then you're putting something on the text that was never put there by the writers of the text, and that is not okay. If we say love means, if love somehow gets to redefine, well, okay, that's a great example with homosexuality. Love is love, is come to mean, love is just being able to express your sexual desires however you want to with whoever you want to. But that's not how the Bible describes love. It might be how it describes erotic love, but it's not how it describes agape love. And when we say God is love, we don't mean God wants to have sex with whoever he wants to have sex with. You have to keep in the biblical mindset what those words meant at that time. You can't take the redefinition of a secular and wicked culture of words, take their redefinition of words and shove it into the Bible. So please be careful with that. I've been wanting for a long time to address this more directly, and I just find it hard because I'm so far behind on all these teaching videos, but be aware of that. Okay, so this city must be punished. There's nothing but oppression within her. They're doing wicked, horrible things. Looking at these verses, we see when God looks at Judah, it's like all he sees is oppression and violence and destruction and sickness and wounds. All this horribleness. You just get this grotesque image. I've recently started watching Band of Brothers. Everybody says it's amazing, and yeah, it is really good, but it reminds me of those, even though it wasn't extremely graphic compared to many things. They have the triage center or I guess not triage center, but where they were treating people, the field hospitals where, people were getting their bodies blown to pieces and were getting stitched back up. Same kind of idea, and you just picture that grotesque level of human depravity, people being torn apart. Kind of the same thing here, of just the city is full of constant evil. And it makes me think of, that old principle that the vertical affects the horizontal. If your relationship with God gets off the vertical, then your relationship with other people is going to get off. And I think this is a very clear thought that applies here. Be warned, O Jerusalem. I can't talk. The final verse, be warned, O Jerusalem, lest I turn from you in disgust, lest I make you a desolation, an uninhabited land. And this is, I think, about the third time in the book of Jeremiah we've seen this idea of be warned, O Jerusalem, lest I turn from you in disgust, and just that there is this righteous indignation, this righteous disgust, this righteous blushing. Blushing is mentioned other times, but this idea that some things should disgust you, or at least disgust God, and I think surely we should be like him, right? When we see great wickedness and these wounds, we should have that sort of revulsion like you would have if you saw somebody, a beautiful person just in the sense that all people are beautiful in the sense they're created in God's image, but just like that body getting torn up in a war, so people's souls are getting torn up by evil and wickedness. And that should fill us with some disgust and revulsion, just like if you saw somebody's mangled hand who got it shot up with a big gun. That metaphor fell together in its poeticness because I ran out of energy. But anyway, be warned, O Jerusalem, lest I turn from you in disgust, lest I make you a desolation, an uninhabited land. So even at this time, it seems, God is saying, you can still turn. I mean, as harsh as he's being in condemning them, he seems to still be saying, lest I turn from you, lest I make you a desolation, an uninhabited land. He's saying there's still time. Just stop. God is so merciful if you take the long view of this and think of how long he struggled with people. So this actually relates more to the last verse about the fountain or well that's constantly replenishing its evil. But Matthew Henry had a good line on that. He said, the corrupt heart of man in its natural state casts out evil thoughts, just as a fountain casts out her waters. It is always flowing, yet always full. Thought that was a pretty good line. Anyway, big picture stuff. Honestly, don't have anything in particular that leaps out to me here. Probably the biggest thing is just what I just said of I think we need to find our disgust again. I think we need to find a holy and righteous without being a snob and prideful about it, of being able to say, yeah, wickedness really is bad. That should grieve our heart. I think if you have a heart like God, then you're going to be grieved by sin. And I think we've largely lost that in the church. So I hope we can reclaim that. May God form us to be more like him. Anyway, that's it. I think once again, as always, I thought I'd go quick and I took a long time. 50 minutes. I'm sure it'll be significantly shorter in editing, but still. Sheesh. Shut up already, Jeremy. All right, well, have a wonderful day, and I will catch you next time. Bye.